Now then, with the EU referendum firmly on the horizon, a number of groups are vying to lead the charge to leave Europe. The umbrella campaign Leave.EU is one of those, backed by the UKIP leader Nigel Farage. So much so that they've brought on a standby team, a strategy team, from the United States. I spoke to Gerry Gunster from Gunster Godard down the line from Washington yesterday, and I started by asking Mr. Gunster if he was confident they could achieve one unified campaign.
I do think that there can be a clear path to victory here. Clearly, there are competing organizations that are trying to align themselves to be the official Leave.EU campaign. I'm frankly quite impressed with what I'm seeing from Leave.EU right now, with nearly 180,000 people that have signed up for their organization. They've got 50,000 people that are 150,000 people that are on their Facebook. They're doing a great job on social media with 15,000 followers. So I think that when the whistle is blown and we're ready to take the field to begin a campaign, I think that Leave.EU is in a wonderful position to begin this campaign. Well,
OK, well, even if it is unified, you've got to give the voters that clear reason why they should vote to leave the EU. Is the core message, as in so many ballots, going to pivot around the economy?
Well, you know, they typically do, but let's just for a second take a step back and think about what a referendum campaign is all about. Dermot, that is all that I do for a living. I run referendum campaigns. I do not do candidate campaigns. I would certainly love to have a conversation with you about the difference between a candidate campaign and a referendum campaign. But let's talk for a second, if we can, about a referendum campaign. Ultimately, when voters go into the voting booth, and you'll have to excuse me, the American term isn't a voting booth, we will go in there and we all basically are human beings. And there are a series of things that will go through our heads. Number one, is this going to be good for my self-interest? My family, my budget, my community, my schools, my children. And that is ultimately what this vote is going to come down to. What is the self-interest for the UK voter to say, I am comfortable with leaving the current status quo and leaving the EU? And it is really fundamental to who we are as human beings. What is the self-interest for me to choose to leave the EU?
The personalities involved are hugely important, of course. Is it also essential that the campaign has a clear figurehead or figureheads giving out that message?
Well, again, let's talk about the difference between a candidate that is running for a campaign and a referendum. Let's take, for example, a Hillary Clinton, a Donald Trump, or any candidate that is running for an office. Within 30 to 60 seconds, you may be able to make a decision on that person. And frankly, it might be because you just didn't like the way that their tie looked, or you didn't like the way that their hair looked that particular day. We don't know. With a referendum campaign, you are literally voting on words that are on a piece of paper that have almost they're just words. And so the trick here in running a referendum campaign is, how do you take those words and turn them into a personality? Now, with referendum campaigns, that means that there are many messengers. I will say that if you're in the Midlands, you have a different messenger than you would in the southern part of the state. I mean, Dermot, I have heard your interviews where it's clear that there is a divide in the UK. There are different geographic and demographic breakdowns that every group has to hear from a messenger that they identify with.
Okay.
So I do not believe, and I have told the folks at Leave.EU, and they generally agree with me, this cannot be a campaign run out of Westminster.
There is the possibility, is there not, for damage to some members of the coalition of the Leave.EU campaign? Aren't there some parties that are going to be rather tentative sharing platforms with some of the other parties,
right,
even though they share the same end?
I believe that as we move forward here, people are going to have to do their best to put their differences behind. I have the utmost respect for all the political leaders that were involved in the Scottish referendum. I have the utmost respect for all the folks that are involved in this campaign right now. Again, this is a referendum campaign, and the people of the United Kingdom are the ones that are going to vote on this. And there can't be anything more exciting than having the ability to vote on an issue that is going to potentially historically change the way that the world looks at you. And that is ultimately, this is not about the political elites. This is about the people of the United Kingdom.
Do you have a slight problem, though, in getting the parties together now, in that the referendum is not going to be held now and will be held on slightly different terms to those that exist at the moment, because there's going to be a renegotiation with other members of the European Union. So therefore, there may be some members of the Leave.EU campaign at the moment who actually like what they hear from the Prime Minister when he comes back from Brussels.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is clearly a very complicated scenario that we're dealing with, and not all the pieces of the puzzle have been put together completely. But we are in a marathon. This is not a sprint. And right now we are on the very early stages of a race. And I will tell you that whether this election is in March or whether this election is going to be next September or any time in between, a lot of these things that are happening right now with the different disagreements about who's going to be doing what and what the negotiations are, frankly, aren't going to matter to the voter. Because again, they have a self-interest. They're going to go into that voting booth and they're going to make a decision on whether or not this is good for me, this is good for my family, this is good for my security, and ultimately, as we say in the U.S., is this good for my pocketbook? Am I going to be able to pay my taxes and pay my bills? And not only that, but it is going to be better for me.
Gerry Gunster, who's advising the Leave.EU campaign. Now, coming up in the next hour on Monahan.